All right, welcome back, everybody. We will now begin the interview portion of our program. Joining Dr. Reid at this time are her co-author, Dr. Heather Bhatti, reader in the Department of Mathematics at the Imperial College of London, and her former student, Dr. Anna Maria Staku, professor in the Department of Statistics at North Carolina State University. Please welcome our distinguished guests.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Maria from NC State, and here is Heather, and we're very happy to be here today and interview Professor NancyReid. I will start with a brief introduction of Nancy. NancyReid was born in Niagara Falls, Canada. She graduated from the University of Waterloo with a bachelor in mathematics and a master in statistics in '74. She pursued her training in statistics at the University of British Columbia, where she obtained a master in applied mathematics in '76, and at Stanford University, where she graduated with a PhD in statistics in '79. After spending 1 year at the Imperial College London, she joined UBC as an assistant professor in the Department of Mathematics. And in 1986, she moved to the University of Toronto as a faculty member in the Department of Statistics, now Statistical Sciences, where she has been ever since, including serving as a chair for 5 years in 1997. Nancy's research in conditional inference, higher-order asymptotics, and composite likelihood has been influential in statistics. Her outstanding contributions to statistics were recognized nationally and internationally with many awards, including the President's Award of Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies, COPS Gold Medal awarded by the Statistical Society of Canada, and elected as Foreign Associate of the National Academy of Sciences. She was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society of London and received the Distinguished Achievement Award and Lectureship from COPS in 2022. More recently, she received the ASA David R. Cox Foundations of Statistics Award, the Royal Statistical Society's Guy Medal in Gold, as well as the IMS George Waba Award and Lectureship. Nancy served with distinction as editor of the Canadian Journal of Statistics and the Annual Review of Statistics and its application. Nancy has supported the discipline of statistics in many important ways, such as serving as director of the CANSI, Canadian Statistical Sciences Institute, and co-chair of the IMS Committee on Ethics. She has also served as president of the IMS and the Statistical Society of Canada, and is currently president-elect of the Bernoulli Society. For her outstanding achievement and exemplary leadership and service to the Canadians, she was appointed as Officer of the Order of Canada in 2014. Nancy, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit about your childhood and upbringing? What did your parents do?
My childhood and upbringing. I'm a baby boomer. So I grew up in the 50s and 60s in a small town, Niagara Falls, Canada. And like most families of that time, my mother was a homemaker and my father worked as a chemical engineer. Both my parents went to university to get undergraduate degrees. That's where they met. And I think my mother was very frustrated at being a homemaker and encouraged me to not do that. But it was a very traditional small town upbringing. The schools were pretty good. Our high school was very good and had a very good math program. So that was helpful. But otherwise it was, I think, unremarkable in some way.
You went to your bachelor at Waterloo. How was Waterloo as a place to study?
Well, it turned out to be wonderful. It was quite a new university at the time, and it had a faculty of mathematics, still does, of course. But the professors were very young. They were just starting their careers, and the statistics group in particular was really quite lively. And they had tremendous leadership under David Sprott, and he used to invite distinguished people from around the world to come in for a week or 2 weeks to Waterloo because it was a little known place when it was starting out. So David Cox went there every year for a week. George Barnard went regularly, and Godambe was hired permanently. And so there were these, quite distinguished senior people coming through, and then there was this cadre of young assistant professors who were just very engaging. So it was a really nice place to be an undergraduate.
And then for your master's, you went to UBC. What made you choose UBC for your master's studies?
Yeah, I didn't really even know about graduate school, but my professors at Waterloo encouraged me to think about applying for a fellowship to do graduate work. And so I did what they told me, and I won the fellowship. And it turned out you could take it anywhere in Canada. And in those days, it was more cool to go to the West Coast than it was to stay in Ontario. So I thought it would be just an adventure to go to Vancouver and study there. A safe adventure. I was funded and I was going to school. Everyone else was hitchhiking across the country and camping, but it was my version of a nerdy adventure.
Okay, and you did your PhD at Stanford. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit what that was like? Was it very competitive?
Again, I mean, encouragement from my professors at UBC, because I thought I would get a master's and then get a job. And they encouraged me to think about going to Stanford for my PhD because they had done that. And people from Stanford used to visit us, at UBC. The UBC group was tiny. There were maybe 3 or 4 statisticians in a math department. But we had people coming to visit regularly, and so we got exposed to a lot. So they gave me a lot of encouragement. And of course, Stanford was one of the hot seats of statistics, so I lucked into it really, but it was really a lovely place to be, very, very dynamic, somewhat competitive. I was pretty tense. I wasn't sure I was good enough to be there, and I was kind of worried about that all the time. But really, I mean, I made friends for life and was exposed to such an interesting array of statistical thinking that it was terrific.
Brad Ephron produced some very influential papers around that time. There was the 1975 paper on geometry of exponential families and the 1979 on the bootstrap. Did you get a sense that there was something exciting going on?
Yes, we definitely did. I was at the first bootstrap talk. I was one of many, of course. He gave the talk to the department in spring of 77, because he was about to take it to one of the meetings to present. So he practiced in the department. And in those days, there would be a sheet of paper on a bulletin board and have the title of the talk, the speaker, and the abstract. And this week it was Brad Ephron, another look at the jackknife, and there was no abstract. And this generated its own excitement, right? And then he had a PhD student doing some of the computations for him, and the PhD student wasn't allowed to say anything about what he was doing. So we went along with, like, Brad's giving a talk and it's something really new, and we all have to be there. And it felt like something really new. I mean, some of the front row profs who always asked the tough questions were skeptical. So this can't possibly work, like statisticians everywhere, right? But really we felt like, yeah, this is like a big day in the department. It was a pretty nice memory for me. Yeah.
And then you went to do a postdoc in England.
Yes.
What made you do a postdoc in the UK, and why there?
And again, I mean, just kind of lucky. A friend of mine was doing a postdoc at Oxford, and he was one of these kind of people that talked about himself a lot, and he kept saying how great it was going to be to do a postdoc in Oxford, and it never occurred to me to do a postdoc because no one in stats did one. He was in pure math, and he had no choice, right? But I thought, well, I could try that, and then probably I should go to wherever this David Cox is. That would be a nice place to go, and then I get to see London. That seemed kind of interesting. But I had known from my days in Waterloo that David Cox was a very famous statistician, and some students from Waterloo had gone to study with him in England. So it was kind of in my perceptions that this would be an interesting thing to do. And then I did get a certain amount of encouragement. I got a lot of encouragement from some people, and to my surprise, some of the faculty at Stanford told me not to go. I wouldn't like it because the English aren't very friendly. But other faculty said, no, go, that's a big opportunity for you, so do it. So I did, yeah.
How, so you work with David Cox, and that's kind of where it started. Can you share with us the earliest encounter with Sir David Cox, and how was working with him?
Well, working with him, and everyone who's worked with him will say this, was an absolute delight, because he was he had very interesting ideas, but he met you on your level in some sense. So he kind of knew instinctively what problems would work for you. At least I had that feeling for me, but I also saw him do that with other people. So it was just a pleasure to engage with him. What else can I say? How did we get started? Well, I wrote to him to ask if I could come and do a postdoc, and he was so efficient. He just replied immediately, yes, of course, you're welcome to come here. And he was very busy. We didn't see each other very much, but 1 minute of David's time was worth a lot. You know, he could drill to the heart of the matter very quickly and come up with very interesting suggestions. And so again, a very lucky break for me and a wonderful experience.
And after Imperial, you moved back to UBC in 1980 and Toronto in 1986. Can you tell us a little bit what the start of your career was like?
Well, I went to UBC because when I was a student there, I kind of fell in love with the scenery and the outdoor living and so on. And so I was delighted to go back as a professor. We were in the math department. There was just a few of us in statistics, but we actually managed to launch our own department and split off from the math department about 3 years after I arrived. I went in 1980. We started in 83. Maybe 84, actually, because Jim Zidek this fall gave the 40th anniversary address to the department. So it must have been 84 that we officially launched our own department. And there were just 6 faculty, I guess, and 2 assistant professors, and the chair of the department, and 2 adjunct professors, and 1 associate professor. So it was a pretty small group, but it was interesting because we got to build everything from scratch. And we created our programs, undergrad program, master's program, PhD. And the senior colleagues had a vision for the future. So even though we were doing all these things for which we had no money and no people to do it, we set up all the right things so that when it grew, it would grow in the right direction. So it was very interesting. It was hard work, but it was a good experience to be in on the ground floor of something like that, and well worth it. I think the department's done quite well.
In your statistical science interview with David Cox, you asked him to comment on something he'd written in a letter to you, which was that after not having very much encouragement when he was younger, he seemed in later life to be receiving a bizarre excess. Does that apply, or did that apply to you?
Yeah, I remember that because he was, I guess when he was knighted, everyone was writing to him. In those days he wrote, of course. But he had written me a letter before I learned that he was knighted. He'd written a letter that said, "You may soon hear a bizarre rumor about me. I trust you'll give it the attention it deserves." And I had no clue. I was in Vancouver, right? I had no clue what he was talking about. And then Peter McCullough's wife said, "Oh, didn't you hear he's been knighted?" I said, "Oh, that's what he meant." So, of course, I wrote to him. But that's not what you asked me. No, I think I had a lot of encouragement. David did say that when he was starting out, he didn't have much encouragement from his colleagues. He was in a sort of Cambridge math department where people kept to themselves. But I would say I started my career at a time when people wanted to encourage women, and I guess you can tell from my answers already if they said this would be a good thing to do. I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So I wasn't trying to fight it or anything. So I think on the whole, I was pretty well supported. I feel like many of my answers are making it sound like everything was wonderful and life is wonderful, and there were some rocky bits too, but they're not what loom in my imagination. It was hard work, of course, and I was a rather tense student and maybe a tense assistant professor before I got tenure, like many others. But But on balance, my memories are quite positive. And I do credit many people in my life, but David most especially, but Jim Zidek and the group at Waterloo for giving me a lot of encouragement.
The 1990s were exceptionally productive for you. You started a family where your professional responsibilities grew significantly. In addition to your ongoing research, you co-authored the theory of design of experiments, you co-edited the empirical base and likelihood inference. On the admin side, you serve as the chair of the statistics department at University of Toronto and as editor of the Canadian Journal of Statistics. How were you able to manage all these demands, and how were you able to achieve such a high success on so many different fronts?
I'm getting tired just thinking about it, being reminded. Well, I had a lot of help. We had good help at home. I don't know, I think a lot of people and a lot of women will look back on their working career and think, oh, how did I do that? Especially when the children are very young, right? And a lot of men too, I'm sure. It's when you're sleep deprived and getting through those classes. I remember coming to a PhD lecture on higher order asymptotics at 10 in the morning, and I looked around the room and I said, if any of you are thinking of having children, don't. And they looked really shocked. But I'd had one of those mornings from hell where everything was going wrong and kids were screaming, and it's like, yeah, no, this is too much. But no, on the whole, I had help, and I don't know, you just kind of, I don't think I was especially gifted at managing my time or anything. I was very fortunate to work with great people and great students, and you just kind of do what you can and hope it'll be good enough.
Many of your publications are co-authored with Don Fraser, who was not only your husband, but also your colleague in the department. And together you co-advised many students as well. Did your research discussions carry over into your home life? How did your collaboration with Don differ from collaborating with other collaborators like Sir David Cox, for example?
So that's a hard one because, of course, it's a huge part of my whole life. But yes, our conversations very often overlapped. We would sit at dinner and talk about the department and the seminar that day, and the girls would get quite frustrated because we weren't listening to them, and so they'd start talking about what happened at their school and shouting louder than we were, and so on. And the girls got a little bit resigned to having to listen to a few tirades against Bayesian inference, I have to say, not from me. But yeah, it was part of our, I guess we were well suited in that way because we both loved to work, so it was a big part of our life all the time. Maybe the only one of the reservations I might have is like the girls felt a bit intimidated that we were so successful and that they could never be that successful, and I feel a bit badly about that aspect of it, but on the whole it suited each of us very well to be deeply involved with someone who was also really loved to work and loved to think about statistics. It just kind of suited us. Of course, everyone knows if you've tried to do anything collaborative with your nearest and dearest, it has a few frayed edges that come out from time to time, and you have to kind of navigate, how you're going to manage these things, and that you don't need to worry about with your colleagues. So it's just different. It's more personal, and so it's silly to have an argument in the evening about whether Bayes is all total fraud or just partly fraud, but it happens. But we managed to figure it out. I think many people have negotiated similar compromises.
Your research has been recognized with numerous distinctions and awards over the years. Are there any particular awards that came with interesting stories or memorable experiences that you can share with us?
Well, it's always nice to win awards. David was right in that. He also said in terms of the bizarre excess, he said the system is a bit wrong because the more awards you get, the more awards you win, and it really should be the other way around, and I agree with that. But of course, it's always a pleasure to get them. When I won the President's Award, I was completely taken aback, and in those days someone, I don't remember who, I regret to say, but someone phoned me at home on a landline, of course, and I'm standing there, and he told me the news. I was so surprised, I shouted into the phone, meaning to talk to Don, and Don, I won the cops. and the man I was speaking to wouldn't have known that I was even living with Don at the time, and he said, you know, it's supposed to be a secret. I said, well, it's okay, I'm just at home with my partner, so that was wonderful and quite a surprise and a delight. And most COPS winners the President's Awards winners will tell you the same thing. It just comes out of the blue and you think, wow, isn't this amazing? I guess the other thing that was pretty special was Don was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2011, and a group of us from the department had put him up for that, and we were very excited that it worked. And Don and I went to Ottawa and went to a fancy, black tie dinner and everything. It was really great. And then 3 years later, they phoned me, and I thought, wow. And so I was appointed to the Order of Canada. So we got to go back and do it all again. So that was really special. Partly because I made my whole career in Canada and could have made my career in the US or elsewhere. And it wasn't obvious that it was the right choice at the outset. So that was kind of special to get a recognition from Canada.
We both think that the foundations of statistical inference is important or are important. Why is that in your view? And how would you distinguish foundations from other aspects of statistical theory?
Well, I guess it took me a long while to come around to the foundations. So before I even met Don Fraser, what I knew of him was, he works in foundations, no one understands what he does. And I thought, well, yeah, foundations sounds like philosophy. I'll try to stay away from that if I can. And it was only in later years that I realized that I was always interested in the theory, and I think the theory of statistics is a bit different from the foundational aspects, although it's a little hard to separate them. But I was interested in the kind of math stat and things you could prove rather than applied stats, for example. But in terms of kind of understanding the difference between different formulations of uncertainty and so on, I didn't start thinking about that till much later. And really David Cox was the one who made it seem more accessible to me. Even though Don was an expert, I didn't quite understand how he thought about it. But David, I could talk to him more easily about these aspects. But I think it's absolutely essential and so important, and even important to teach our students because, and David has said this better than I can, but otherwise statistics becomes a bag of tricks. And I think you see that a little bit in machine learning and other aspects of deep learning and artificial intelligence and so on. That like, okay, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. It's working, isn't that amazing? Wow, this is really something. But for the kinds of data that many of us deal with, or many applied statisticians or scientists deal with, it's you don't want to start over from the beginning. You want some kind of principled way to understand variability and its impact on your answers, and you kind of want to understand where the answers come from. And I think the foundations of statistics gives us that. Maybe not in such an accessible way, because it does seem a difficult subject, but it's kind of there to make the subject cohere in some way. And I think it's completely fundamental, and the feedback loop from applied to new methods, to the theory behind the methods, to the the real foundations of what makes this tick. I think that's really quite important, and I don't think it'll ever go away. I mean, lots of people say, oh, we have so much data now, we'll just drill through it and find answers in the data, but I'm convinced that we won't find that satisfactory over the long term.
And you wrote a book on the theory of experimental design, a very good book, but this area isn't reflected in your research. Have you drawn on the understanding in other ways?
Yes and no, I guess it's true. I haven't done any research in the design of experiments in the classical way, but it does inform my thinking whenever I'm trying to think through a model. I always kind of go back to that kind of classical way of thinking of treatments and blocks and setting it out in a kind of structure that makes sense. The book itself developed, when I interviewed David for Statistical Science, he mentioned that he had a collection of notes on theoretical aspects of experimental design, and I had studied design at quite a high level at Waterloo. It was required at the time, and I really enjoyed it. It was my favorite class. So I had really good notes, and I'd taught the course many times. So I suggested that we might work on it together, and that turned out to be really quite enjoyable, although quite hard work because the children were young. I was telling Anna Maria and Heather this morning that I can remember, like, they were, at some kind of sports lessons, and I was perched on a little bench in the tiny little kids' gym doing, page proofs of the book to make sure it got done by Sunday night because David was waiting, and so it was hard work, but found it very interesting, and I like going back over it and looking at those classical topics. It's gone much out of fashion in our programs and courses, the theory of experimental design, but I find it quite fascinating still.
During the 1990s and early 2000, higher order asymptotics attracted significant interest from prominent researchers like yourself, Bardem Nielsen, Thomas Severini, Rob Stroderman, Anthony Davison, and many others. What do you think drove that interest?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of emerged quickly because Daniels had published this paper on the saddle point approximation in '54, but Barndorf, Nielsen, and Cox published a follow-up in '79, so 25 years later. But I think it was the '79 paper that got people thinking. And then in a famous issue of Biometrica in August 1980, there were 5 papers on the same approximation, and they all derived independently from different points of view. And I was just starting at UBC at that time, and we waited to get Biometrica in the mail, and then that's the first thing you did was that evening you read the cover and tried to see what kinds of things you would look at, and here were these 5 papers all on the same topic. And Charles Stein came to visit, and he said, yeah, the August 1980 issue of Biometrica is very interesting. So I started a working group at UBC to go through them, and then I just kind of carried on from there, but it was kind of a golden era. There was all these interesting things to be discovered, and they were coming out quickly. And when I went on my sabbatical to Austin, Texas, we had a working group doing saddle point approximations, and it just kind of emerged. I guess Brad would have had a big impact on that, and it's kind of like all the limit theory was done, but now could we delve into the details and get something more precise? And it felt very exciting at the time, and it felt like it was kind of uncovering real things, foundational things. The bootstrap did too, I must say, working on the bootstrap, which is very closely connected to this higher order asymptotics, and felt like it was getting to something quite fundamental for the theory of inference.
A few of your publications review key topics, such as your 96 paper on likelihood and higher order approximations, 2010 paper reviewing auxiliary statistics, 2011 reviewing composite likelihood. What do you find most rewarding about this approach, and what challenges arise when you write the review paper?
Well, I've always really liked writing review papers, and when I was starting out, the advice would have been, don't write any review papers. Perhaps it still is, don't write any review papers, because, you know, to get tenure, you have to have original research, and review papers, by definition, aren't. But I ignored it to some extent. Statistical science was launched just when I was starting. I think my 88 statistical science paper is volume 3 or 4 or something. It's a very early volume. It just been started, and I thought it was great, the journal. I loved the papers in it, and I liked the idea of summarizing a whole area and trying to make it accessible. So I remember writing this, the first review paper I wrote, I really wrote all at once, like it sort of just was all in my head, and I just copied it down. It was, and I sent it to statistical science and said, I don't know if this will work or not, but they wrote back fairly soon and said, yeah, that's just what we're looking for. So I kind of kept that up. But I'm not answering your question. You asked what are the challenges? Well, it's hard to survey a whole area, and it takes time away from your research. But I think I'm pretty good at getting the gist of things quickly, and I'm better at that than doing the details, so it kind of very much suited my talents. So I like giving a big overview kind of things and touching on a lot of different topics, and it just suits my way of thinking about things, I guess. And so I've always found it quite enjoyable. And now, as the editor of the Annual Review of Statistics and its application, we solicit review papers. And if you'd like to write a review paper, send me an email. But I very much enjoy that too. I think it's great for our discipline to have these papers, and I hope they're becoming more valued.
Okay, we're getting close to the end. I wondered if you could give us some broader perspectives on the area. So what type of papers make the biggest impression on you when you read them? I don't mean in terms of topic, but in terms of formulation.
What kind of papers? I really like papers that I find to be well written, and I couldn't really define what I mean by well written. But if I feel they're not, then even if the content is very, very original, I find it harder to engage with them. But I also try to keep an open mind as much as possible, because I think original ideas are very difficult to get accepted. And sometimes if they're very original, they're hard to explain clearly. So you can write well but still be unclear in some ways. Like if the sentences are well put together, but even the work is really, really hard, it might be very difficult to be clear about it. But if the ideas are compelling, I think that it's the most important way to advance our discipline. So I've always tried to be as open as possible to kind of things that I think, well, I don't really get this, but it looks like there might be something there. I probably failed as many times as I've succeeded, but I have tried to think about it from that point of view. I was associate editor of Biometrica quite early in my career. Again, David Cox asked me would I like to do that, and I said I would. And we got a submission that had pages and pages and pages of algebra, asymptotic expansions to very many orders, and almost no English words, just Greek letters, like for pages and pages. And I was kind of young, and I feel now a bit arrogant, and I said to David, we don't publish this kind of stuff in Biometrica, right? And he said, only if it's important. So I thought, oh, now I have to read it. But I think that was very wise. Some things are hard to read, but they might be very important, and other things flow nicely, but they're kind of a bit more incremental. I find it harder to become engaged with those.
Your exceptional leadership has greatly contributed to the statistical profession over the years. As you reflect on your journey, what are your thoughts on the challenges you faced and the impact of your contributions?
Well, I hope my contributions have been more or less positive. There's leadership in different ways. I've often felt as a leader that I have not done as much as I would have liked to have done. As department chair, maybe as president of the IMS. As you mentioned, those things coincided with our children being quite young, so it was hard to juggle all the balls, and I often felt like I wasn't doing as much as I should have been. But on the whole, I guess I've tried to learn from leaders that I respected. David Cox, obviously, Don, David Andrews, the department chair who hired me, my supervisors. I tried to kind of see what I respected about them and pay it forward in some way. I don't particularly like being in charge, actually. It's hard work, and it's kind of the buck stops with you. But when I have been, I've tried to set a good example for the next group generation coming along, and because that's how I figured out how to do as good a job as I could do. So I would say that's, if my impact has been to encourage any of you to take a leadership position, good, that's good. That's a positive impact, and go for it. Start your own department. It's really fun.
Nancy, thank you so much for sharing your research and leadership and life experiences, as well as for all your groundbreaking contributions to the fields of statistics.
Oh, well, thank you both. It's been fun. We had a whole morning of this kind of preamble for this, and I know it was a lot of work for both of you. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for coming today. It's a delight to be here.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Ana Maria and Heather, for excellent discussion. I'm sure, I think the audience will remember many things, and we really appreciate your presence here. And hopefully, some of the people, if you have further questions, you can continue at the dinner time. So without any further time, I just wanted to invite my colleague Yao Zheng in this podium.
Thank you, Dr. Spati and Seku, for your thoughtful questions. At this point, I invite Dr. NancyReid to the podium for the award presentation. Dr. Reid, will you please come forward? And I would now like to recognize the members of the organizing committee who are present with us, Dr. Stay and Dr. Schifano. Please join us. On behalf of our sponsors and guests, Dr. Reid, we would like to thank you for such inspirational remarks. To honor your participation in this event, we would like to present you with a plaque in recognition of your exceptional contributions to our field.
I should be shaking your hand if I do all the work. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you to Dr. Reid and our speakers. Also, thank you to our sponsors, Pfizer, ASA, and UConn for making this event possible. And thank you all for coming. We hope to see you again next year. Thank you.